You are listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast, where we look to educate and entertain the endurance racing community through discussions with racing professionals and elite age groupers.
In today's episode of the podcast, I speak with runner and reporter Jay Korff. Jay produced a documentary about Tom Mitchell. Tom recently ran the Tahoe 200 to raise awareness for his Childhood Cancer Foundation. We talk about the Tahoe 200 and this documentary. I hope you enjoy. Jay, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. Grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much, Adam.
So why don't we talk a little bit about your background? So you're a news reporter working out of the DC area, and you're also a filmmaker. I mean, before we talk about your upcoming film, can you just talk briefly about your interest and own background in running and trail running specifically?
Yeah, so I started reporting back in the early 1990s in Helena, Montana. And, you know, when you're a first-time reporter, you go wherever you get the job.
Yeah.
And I was so blessed to be out west. And I didn't realize it, but I was a mountain person. You know, I think some people are water people. Some people are, you know, beach-type people, agrarian. Me, I'm a mountain person. And in order to, I discovered over time that mountain, Mount Helena, and all of the mountains around it in that part of western Montana really became my stress relief for the crazy job that I had. And I started hiking, and then I was like, well, wait a minute, I could run up this. And before you know it, I was absolutely hooked. It was my meditation, it was my sanctuary. And I just really grew to have this love for that relationship between me and the outdoors. And so that, you know, kept me sitting, trim, and out of trouble. And I moved around a lot. And before you know it, I stopped trail running and I started getting out of shape, and my cholesterol went up and my weight went up. And I looked at myself in the mirror one day and I said, for my 30th birthday, I'm going to give myself a present. I was 29 and I gave myself a year to train and to race. And I was living in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, which has great trail running. And I decided to pick trail running as my sport. So I dedicated the next year of my life to getting into shape, losing weight. And then for my 30th birthday, I did the Big South Fork, which is this race kind of out in the middle of nowhere in north central Tennessee, I think it's like a 30K.
Yeah. And
it was my first race, and it just absolutely destroyed me. I ran like the first 15 miles so fast, like flying, that the last 3 miles I walked. And it was both humiliating and exhilarating, and I've never turned back.
And so let's talk a little bit about Endure, so your upcoming film. So you're now, you know, obviously you're merging two passions, right? Storytelling and running. And in this case, you're documenting a story about a runner, Tattoo Tom Mitchell, who, you know, has a very, very compelling, interesting story. But why don't you start off by just telling us, how did you meet Tom, and what is his background?
Yeah, so I started covering as a reporter for the ABC affiliate here in Washington, D.C., I'd say I started covering maybe 4 to 5 years ago, just kind of general stories about the childhood cancer community and what they faced, what the parents faced, the mounting medical bills, the lack of research funding, the lack of new treatment protocols. And it was just so painful, and it seemed like such a national tragedy that I kept on covering more stories. And that's when I encountered Tom Mitchell, a.k.a. Tattoo Tom. He's got some tattoos. And as it turns out, he was doing really remarkable work, a small foundation called Still Brave Childhood Cancer Foundation, in which they get non-medical needs to families whose children have cancer. So, you know, like cards for food, cards for gas, cards for rent, and sadly he pays for all too many funerals. So I started doing stories with him, and he wasn't really an athlete, frankly, but he realized almost kind of initially as a gimmick that, hey, like I could do a 50-mile race, dedicate each mile to a different kid with cancer, and I can raise some money. Right. And then that led to a 100-mile race. And that was my first short documentary where I documented him competing in the Mohican 100 in Ohio back a few years ago. And he barely finished that. I think he finished that with like 30 minutes to go before the cutoff time. It was a slog. And then he decided just a couple months later that he was going to up the ante big time and try to run a 200-mile ultramarathon, dedicating each mile to a different child with cancer. And I decided to join along.
So the 200 mile you're speaking of is the Tahoe 200, and I've had a number of people on this podcast, including Candace Bird, who's the race director on the podcast, talking about that race. So it's 200 miles. It's in the Alpine mountains of around Tahoe. Definitely something extremely challenging. And so he not only decided to do something like a 200 mile race, but he took something that's going to be really challenging and obviously inspiring as well. So I can only imagine, when you came up with the idea, hey, I want to document this, it makes for a really good, inspiring story, right?
Oh my gosh. I you never know what you're going to get into when you do something like this as a storyteller, but every expectation just blew me away. For starters, I had to train a certain way for the race to keep up with him. I primarily used a mountain bike to get in and out of the aid stations, but I did a lot of running, a lot of fast packing. And then Tom, of course, had to prepare. And remember, he's not an athlete. So one of the things that I did to prepare, and people love this story, was that I went on a run with him just a few months before the race. And it was a hill workout, because I knew that there's tons and tons of elevation gain in these races that Candace puts on. And he couldn't keep up with me for 10 or 15 seconds doing the hill workout. Obviously we're very different runners, but I was really worried. I was really concerned, this guy is just not that fit. But as a part of the setup, as a part of the backstory during the film, we show you what he does to train, to get ready for this. And he hires a former boxer, a former professional boxer, to help him kind of old school train, like Rocky Balboa. And it's really very compelling. And then the race itself, one thing, yes, it's very dry out west. We know that. But one thing that I didn't know going into it, and to my horror, really began to affect me like on day 2 and 3, and was affecting all the racers, that particular fall, late summer, fall, there were wildfires going on all around the Lake Tahoe area, I think also like to the west. And so not only was it really dry, crazy dry, like dusty dry, so people were getting a lot of blisters, but there was just this particular matter in the air. And you know how Tahoe is always really sunny? It was really overcast. And I had asked somebody when I was really struggling with dehydration as I was covering the race, and I was like, why is it so dry and cloudy out here? And they said, that's not cloudy, that's ash.
From the race perspective, talk to me a little bit how it unfolded. So like the days before going into it, when you were talking to Tattoo Tom, was he focused and ready? Was he nervous? Did he feel prepared? This is something that it's hard to wrap your mind around doing a 200-mile race. So just talk a little bit about his mental state going into it.
Well, he had prepared very, very well. He was physically very, very fit, but even more than that, he has the things that he has to deal with as children are dying or as they're struggling to fight for their life or when they're in the oncology units. He has a mettle that I think a lot of ultramarathoners also have, this sort of ability to kind of compartmentalize pain and to be able to suffer. So he was very nervous. He was like, his hands were shaking nervous, but, he had a lot of reasons to run and a lot of reasons to finish. And as the race unfolded, I know that he was really super excited. But almost immediately off the bat, Adam, he got into deep trouble. I didn't realize this, but Candace ended up putting the hardest section of the race was in the first 30, 40 miles.
Right.
And that was the desolation area off to the south and west of Lake Tahoe, and that's like the Rubicon Trail where the dust is like inches thick, and just nothing but ups and downs. I remember when I was covering the race, I didn't really feel like there were a lot of ridge lines. There was a little bit of ridge line, but just this constant pounding of up and down. And he came into, I had access to most of the aid stations. Pacers were not permitted to start until about mile 62. But I was there at mile 30 when he came in, and he was already in trouble. He already had all these blisters on his feet. He was totally wiped out, and he didn't think he would have any chance to finish the race.
And so the race obviously has cutoffs, and so how close was he to the cutoffs? And as the race went on, and obviously pressure starting to build. But how was he relative to that?
Well, that's really the incredible thing about these races that Candace puts on, is that they're sort of brilliantly timed in that, if you run a little more, you can rest a little more and you can give yourself a little bit of a cushion. But if you're not a super, super fit person like Tom, he's not doing tons and tons of running. But that means that he has, he's going to be really sleep deprived. So and then if you get behind, if you're, as I was following the ebb and the flow of the race, it was, the last, 5 to 10 to 15 people in the back, they are constantly fighting that cutoff time. When you get about third to halfway through the race, he really, really began to struggle, and they really got into a big jam when they miscalculated about halfway through the race when the cutoff time was for a particular aid station, what time they had to leave.
Right.
And they almost missed the cutoff time. And then from that point forward, Adam, every single aid station that they would go into was like a panic. They had, he and his pacer and his crew chief, who was pacing somebody else, this wonderful guy named Ken Dam, it was not only an athletic endeavor, but it was an endeavor in math. How do we get through this? And it was, that's a part of the great drama of the film, is he able to finish?
Right. And you bring up such an interesting point, which is you've got this sort of balance between effort and going out and going quick and then getting more time in the aid stations to sleep versus sleep deprivation and going slower. And obviously, you got to land somewhere in the middle. There's people who go too fast and blow up, and then there's people who go too slow and get cut off. And so it's definitely a strategic puzzle to solve. So I can understand how people would fall into trouble with that.
And what I also found to be so fascinating is, not only is there trying to manage the race from a time perspective, how much do I run? How much do I sleep? When do I sleep? But there's also obviously the nutrition factor. And what was hilarious about Tom, there were all these guys and gals along the way. Like every once in a while, you would come into an aid station and see somebody passed out, and they'd be like, yeah, his stomach went south, or, yeah, he didn't take care of his feet. And, it's so interesting how just one little mistake, if you don't tend to your feet every single aid station, you're done.
Yeah.
Or you're going to suffer immeasurably if you don't know what kind of fluid your body can take, what kind of food you can eat and when you can eat it, you can be done. And what is so funny about Tom, this man can eat anything. He's like a human garbage truck. He comes into an aid station. It was so funny. How when you're, so I've done some really long races. I've done some really long mountain bike races. I think the farthest I've ever raced is about 40 miles on my seat, but I've done some 9 and 12 hour mountain bike races. And, that you're tired, when all you can think about is what you want to eat. And for me, it was always pepperoni pizza and a Mountain Dew. But you're in trouble, deep trouble, and all you want to do is sleep. And that was something that somebody had said to me once, and I noticed when I got into longer races. But I have to say that, Tom could come in and eat anything. He'd be like, I need a hamburger. And, there would be these aid station volunteers. These aid stations for Candace's races are insane.
Yeah.
They're amazing. I mean, almost every single aid station, you've got like a certified chef who's back there making, vegan, gluten-free bean burritos for someone like me who's got gluten issues. They have just all sorts of, just wonderful options. And he would almost always go straight for the all-American product. He'd be like, well, want a hamburger, or, I want some fries, or, and it was Diet Dr. Pepper. Every aid station, he drank a Diet Dr. Pepper. So, for whatever reason, his stomach could handle the rigors of ultramarathoning. And frankly, I think that's a huge, huge part of the puzzle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have a sensitive digestive system, so I tend to, have to deal with, certain liquids or certain, I don't think I could do fries and Diet Dr. Pepper. It probably end badly for me, but that's a huge asset. I mean, if you have that strong, stomach, it really helps in these long races. Yeah.
And it was just really funny. In fact, I can send you some pictures. I've got these hilarious pictures of him, chomping down on a giant hamburger, as he's resting at at a particular aid station, it just amazed me because that's the antithesis of my gastrointestinal system. So
right. And so you mentioned sleep and sleep deprivation. And so, when people think about the 200-mile distance, they obviously the factors around distance and such come to play. But the thing that's the big wild card that people fear is the sleep deprivation, because there's no other real race where you're, 100-miler, you're going in 24 hours or somewhere around there. You're missing one night's sleep at most. In this case, you're talking 3-4 days. So, how much sleep did he actually get? And then also, second question is, how much sleep did you get, and how did you both handle it?
Let me tell you, that was probably the greatest challenge. The physicality I was able to withstand because I didn't really put in that many miles. I mean, I probably combined on the bike and hiking and running, maybe I hit 80 or 85 miles over the course of, over 4 days. I mean, that's definitely doable. But typically when you or I or anybody who's listening to this podcast, when you're putting in those kind of miles, you're sleeping 8 to 10 hours a day. Or you're getting a massage, or you're, doing some stretching, or you're eating right, you're eating at the right time. By far, the sleep deprivation was the worst. The first 2 days, it was manageable. And remember, I've got to capture him as often as I can. So I'm going in and out of every aid station. I would go in, get out of my SUV, get my mountain bike, put on my pack with all my gear, and ride a mile or two into the trail the opposite direction so I could get some film and some footage of Tom and the other racers. Then I would ride back, go to the aid station, interview him really quickly, ride a couple miles in, get more footage of him, go back to the same aid station, get in my car, and then do that iterative process over and over and over again. So what would happen is I would typically get into an aid station like an hour or 2 hours before him, because I would always be one aid station ahead of him. So I would just try to get little cat naps and stuff here or there. I probably averaged maybe 2 hours of sleep a night. I think there was one night where I got 2.5, and I felt like, I had slept for days.
Yeah.
But I didn't really get it in, it would be like in 45-minute spurts. So I would usually be able to kind of rest my eyes for 45 minutes to an hour a couple of times a day. Tom was even worse. I think he averaged maybe 90 minutes a day sleep. And, the first couple of days was no problem for any of us. We weren't physically exhausted. We were all pumped up on adrenaline. But Adam, by day 3 and by day 4, the wheels were coming off big time.
Right.
I mean, I was having a hard problem focusing. There was a lot of blue and orange video that, I'm having to operate equipment while I'm doing this. Oh, it's brutal. And Tom was absolutely losing his mind, which, come to find out after the fact, is actually not that unusual. I think that there's something like, I can't remember what the figure is, and forgive me, I'm probably getting this wrong, but I think Candace did an unscientific question of some of the runners, and I can't remember if it was 65% or 70% of the runners at some point hallucinated.
Yeah, sleep is important.
And he really lost his mind when he went into, I want to say it was Incline Village. It was up in the northeast section. And he literally was seeing like picture frames and pictures of people in the woods. And there was a stretch before he came into one of the aid stations where he was having like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, I heard a story recently where I think it was Candace was telling a story about the Bigfoot 200 where someone just went way off course and totally hallucinating and had no idea where they were. So, it's one of these things where, it's a fine balance of, again, pushing your body and going forward and trying to get a good pace, but also respecting the fact that your body needs sleep. So it's a very, very tough thing. And you also don't get a chance to really simulate it outside the race because in training, you don't want to sleep deprive yourself for multiple days. It's going to be counterproductive. And so speaking of, obviously he who's sleep deprived, very difficult thing in terms of, his mental state at times wasn't great. But were there moments where, you're trying to capture him either coming in and out of the aid station or whatever, and he's just like, enough with the film, leave me alone? I mean, was it, how did that go?
Yeah, there were a few points where, hey, look, I'm a documentarian. I am there to I am there to capture what happens, good, bad, or ugly. And it's very important for me to, not be involved in the race and not be involved in tactics and, not really engage all that much other than just to say, hey, what's going on? And give me an update. How are you feeling? And there were points near the end of the race, I'd say, definitely the last third of the race, where, nerves were so frazzled and he was so sleep deprived and he was tired beyond imagination that he definitely lost it a few times and was not pleased with me being there with my camera and my little top light. And there were a few confrontations, and I would simply say to him, look, you got to suck it up. I'm here, and I'm going to capture this whether you like it or not. So,
Yeah.
But yes, there were definitely some moments where he was not pleased with my presence.
I could imagine. So talk a little bit about taking on a project like this. I view this project as risky only because you don't know what the ending's going to be like. And in some ways that's exciting and amazing, but it could end very in a positive note, could end in a very negative note. And especially over a 200-mile distance, who the heck knows what's going to happen? So, when you're thinking about taking on a project like this, I mean, what were you, how did you convince yourself this was a good idea to take on? And you didn't know when he stepped out, at that starting line, whether he was even going to finish.
That's true. And Tom has attempted the Bigfoot 200 twice, and he just had some bad luck last year and the year before. He got to the 90-mile mark of the Bigfoot, and it was searing record heat, and he just wilted, and he was only able to finish about half of the race in 2016. And then he tried the Bigfoot in 2017, and he got an injury about 50K in, or he had to drop out at 50K. Yeah, so you don't know. And I knew that I was taking a bit of a gamble, but I also, Adam, I was there when he was preparing. And I saw the kind of miles he was putting in, and I saw the kind of effort that he was putting in the gym. I saw him physically kind of change his body, even though he was in his late 40s. Saw him get leaner, stronger core. He was working a lot on his trainer was working on his connective tissue a lot, the fascia, trying just to make him a physically stronger person. And so I felt that would really help him on the ups and downs. But yeah, it's a huge gamble. You're traveling across the country with thousands of dollars in equipment, and you have no idea what's going to happen.
Right.
But I also knew that there's also a story within a story that has to be told and will be told. And frankly, I knew that I was one of only a few people who could probably tell this story. There aren't a whole lot of people who can marry storytelling skills with, the ability to be there for all that time. And so I kind of felt kind of a moral obligation to try to tell this story. And then simultaneously, there's the backstory of, during the film, I tell backstories about Tom's life and about the lives of the families who he helps and some of the children who are fighting the fight. And so that aspect of the story, the childhood cancer part of the documentary, was something that I knew was very compelling and was very important to tell, regardless of how Tom finished.
Right. And, I had Nick Holland on the podcast a while ago, and he's one of the Barkley Marathon's finishers. And I asked him, a piece of advice that he'd give everyone. And he said something that really resonated with me. And I think it applies here, which is have a good reason why you're doing something. Don't just do it for the medal or the photo, but have a good reason why. So then when you get to those deep, dark moments, you can push through. And I can't think of a better reason why than, for in this case, each mile he dedicated something, a mile to a child who lost their battle with cancer. He obviously is trying to raise awareness for his charity, and it's it's an amazing story and just so inspirational. But it goes back to that fundamental truth, which is when you're in that deep dark moment, I mean, you need a good reason why you're out there, and it just can't be for a Facebook photo as an example, right?
Yeah, and I have to tell you that that was truly the driving force behind why I was able to keep on going and why Tom was able to keep on going. A lot of people might not know this, but at every aid station, one of his members of his crew had the laminated photos of all these 200 kids. So let's say we were at mile 30 and the next aid station was at mile 44. He would be handed 14 different cards of these 14 children. each representing a different mile between 30 and 41. So there would be like 11 cards. And then every aid station, he would read off the names of these kids before he would leave. So he would look down at these pictures, and he's like, so whose mile am I going to quit on? And, of course, he wasn't going to do that. He wasn't going to quit on any of those miles.
Yeah.
Another aspect of to dovetail off of what you said, which by far is probably the biggest, quote, surprise and most powerful aspect of the film for me personally, is that several weeks before the race in 2016 that I documented in the film Endure, a woman named Laura Owens, her son died. Her son passed away cold of cancer. And it had only been several weeks, but she and Cole were very, very tight with Tom, and she decided to come out and help crew the race in the Tahoe 200. So she was a part of the crew. And, you know, she would be there at every aid station. Obviously, her heart was shattered, but she was there to help Tom. And none of us could quit on her either.
Right. Yeah, and I previewed the movie, so thank you for letting me do that. And I saw that, and it's just so inspirational, and so it's just incredible. And I can't imagine the kind of pain she was in, but at the same time, I mean, what he was doing just was inspiring, and it's so important. In terms of the film, just give me some information on how would people go about seeing it.
Yeah, so it's going to be released on November 9th. So that's just right around the corner, and all that anybody has to do to see the film is go to the website, which is endurefilm.com. So that's just ENDUREFILM.com, endurefilm.com, and it just push watch the film. That takes you actually to where the film lives, which is Vimeo on demand. And and so people can rent it, people can buy it, and I just had an amazing experience, Adam, at the U.S. Trail Running Conference out in Estes Park, Colorado. I attended that, and I showed the trailer, and got to spend some great time with Terry Chiplin and with Peter Maximow and Nancy Hobbs and all these other great people that are real heavyweights in the trail running community. And I think one of the really neat things about the trail running community is that they are, and I'm not an obsequious person, but they are a very thoughtful bunch of people, and they're very kind, and they have really embraced the film, and that has meant a lot to me, because obviously it's a film about trail running, but it's also about much more than that. And I think back on a few of the 50Ks that I did, and I'll never forget how near the end of some races I just lost my mind. I remember one time I sat down and was just crying because I just had nothing else left, and I was near the end of my trail running career. And I remember every single runner that passed me made sure to come by and stop and ask how I was doing. Can I help you? Can I get you something? Can I give you some salt tablets? Can I give you some fuel? What can I do to help you? And, that's, I think that maybe the trail running community knows this, but I think it's just good to give them some affirmation that they really are a decent bunch of people. And,
oh, yeah.
And I think that shows in the film, and if it doesn't, I just want them to know that they made filming this documentary a lot easier.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the trail running community is like a family, and it's really just such a kind, open community. I mean, it's almost perfect that Tom chose this as the platform for him to, raise the awareness and do something incredible. It's the perfect match. And then in terms of his, charity, Still Brave, can you just talk a little bit about, if someone wanted to find out more information on that, how they would go about doing that?
Yeah. The great thing is that if you go to the website, endurefilm.com, there's going to be a link to the 4 different childhood cancer foundations that we are giving money to. So a portion of proceeds, and this is really important, a portion of proceeds from the film will go to actually 4 different childhood cancer foundations that I have worked with very, very closely with here in the Washington, D.C. area. Max Cures, Smashing Walnuts because of Daniel, and of course, Tom's foundation, Still Brave Childhood Cancer Foundation. So there are links to all 4 of those on the website, but you can, of course, go to stillbrave.org to find out more. I mean, Tom is, does all kinds of great things here in the Washington, D.C. area, helping out kids and their families. When a family gets the diagnosis that their child has cancer, unless they're independently wealthy, Adam, they usually lose everything. They usually don't have a whole lot of leftover money really for much of anything. So, Tom's helping them put gas in their car so they can get to their oncology, trips. And he's making sure that their rent can be paid. He's got all kinds of programs that he does with various hospitals here in the area. And he's also in the process of raising money and training for the Bigfoot 200. He says his third and final attempt in 2018. So he has not given up on this yet.
Right. Well, Jay, thank you so much for, first of all, for making this film. It's really inspiring and really important work that, that Tom's doing, and you bringing the awareness to it through, the documentary is fantastic and important. I'll put a link on my website as well to the film so people can watch it, and then they obviously can get links to the charities. But again, thank you so much for, I know this is not one of the easier types of documentaries to make. Obviously, you said the logistics were really tough, but it's important work and really inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Adam. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Intelligent Racer podcast. For more information on this and other episodes, please visit www.intelligentracer.com. Also, be sure to check us out on social media, and please review us on your podcast directory. Join us next time for another edition of the Intelligent Racer.